Maple Leafs fans for years have been speculating and dreaming of bringing Connor McDavid home to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And what if now was the time for that to happen? Obviously, it's not going to happen this offseason, but following Leon Draisaitl signing a massive contract with the Edmonton Oilers, speculation is really starting to pick up, at least in Toronto Maple Leafs land, about bringing Connor McDavid home. Sort of break down those rumors and discuss if it makes sense. Of course it does, for the Toronto Maple Leafs in the next coming years. What's up, everybody? Darius, this is going to be an interesting one today. Now, we will obviously preface this by saying there are no reports coming out that are saying McDavid is going to sign in Toronto. That being said, it now, a bit more than it did a year ago or a few months ago, makes a bit more sense for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and it makes a bit more, maybe a bit more likely. So we're going to break down everything there. But Darius, let's just dive right into it. But before I do, if you're part of the percentage that aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It is free, and about 70% of you who are watching are not subscribed. So thank you guys for your continued support. All right, let's just dive right into it. This is going to be an interesting one. So we know that Leon Draisaitl signed a very big contract with the Edmonton Oilers, and he came out and basically said Leon Draisaitl hopes his Oilers extension will be followed by one for Connor McDavid next summer, but adds Connor's going to do what's best for him. That's just the way this works, and it's supposed to work that way. I did what I thought was best for me personally, and this comment here led to some speculation by Leafs fans. We saw back on a few days ago, or way back. You can see here, Leafs fans, would you rather win the Cup in 2025 or wait until McDavid joins the Leafs later on in 2026? You can see McDavid and Matthews talking. You saw it in the, you've seen tons of, we've discussed it at nauseum on Twitter and things like that. The infamous picture of McDavid and Matthews. But let's just dive into your thoughts on this, Darius. It's very interesting. Leafs fans are really starting to, I'm not sure if they fully believe it, but it's the closest we've been ever.
Yeah, well, we've seen a lot of it over the last couple of years, right? Or ever since, I guess, Connor McDavid was drafted into the league with that meme, when he was first drafted, that he was not very excited to be going to the Edmonton Oilers at first. Obviously, he's, fit into that role now. And, yesterday on Twitter, obviously, Leon Draisaitl signs that huge extension. He's the highest paid player in the league now, for a year or two, maybe, until McDavid gets his contract extension, or maybe he hits free agency. We don't know what's going to happen with that. But yeah, in terms of Connor McDavid, I mean, I saw it on Twitter yesterday. A lot of people were like, hey, we're not going to read into this, right? No, we're going to read into this quote. We're absolutely going to read into this quote. And Connor's going to do what Connor is going to do. Now, Draisaitl signing that extension, I think, makes it much more likely that Connor McDavid's going to stay in Edmonton, because I feel like a lot was up in the air, especially with Draisaitl. The fact that he signed, to me, seems like they're going to, stick together and try and win in Edmonton. But, it's not just this that has Leaf fans going. It's the fact that McDavid and Matthews have been training together this summer, right? We saw some leaked images, I guess, or, somebody posted the images of them training together. And the fact that they went out to dinner together, and a lot of people were saying, and it's true, like, there is no way that the topic of conversation of, hey, what are you doing with your future, didn't come up in that conversation, right, that they were having at dinner. So a lot going on, right? I'm not saying he's leaving Edmonton. I honestly think it's more likely that at this point he stays in Edmonton because of the contract extension, but fun to talk about. And he is training with Matthews. They haven't done this in previous years, and sounds like they're hanging out and just talking about stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not likely at this point that Connor McDavid comes to Toronto, or even that he leaves Edmonton under any scenario. And again, we've been 132 points in 76 games. We all know how good Connor McDavid is, and obviously we've been discussing a lot of other Leafs targets. I don't even know if I consider Connor McDavid a Leafs target, but he obviously blows everybody out of the water. But the point here is that it is interesting, because you think about the Matthews thing. Obviously, there's been a lot of pictures of them this offseason, whether it's training together. I'm sure they've been hanging out. Obviously, McDavid's Canadian, so it makes tons of sense logically. But when you're looking at the actual reality of the situation, is you see this tweet here. Some will say this is simply two of the most skilled hockey players of a generation enjoying each other's company. Make no mistake, this is two businessmen talking business. And again, is Matthews trying to recruit Connor McDavid to the Toronto Maple Leafs? Probably, like, deep down, yes, but ultimately it's going to be up to Connor McDavid. But it's a very fun thing to talk about. You can see this here. Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid both shared the ice for some off-season training, and that's the picture that I was referencing earlier that was really going around, where some people photoshopped the Leafs jersey on a Connor McDavid, and some people fell for it somehow. But it's very intriguing to me. And again, the fact that they're hanging out so much, they're probably good friends, and they are good friends. They're just training in the off-season together. But given the fact that he hasn't signed an extension with the Leafs, even though I agree with you, the fact that Draisaitl just signed that definitely makes it more likely that he stays in Edmonton, because ultimately McDavid wants to win, and they've started to make significant strides, more so than the Leafs, in winning over the past, specifically last year. So it probably makes more sense for him to stay with Edmonton, but maybe we can dream, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. So.
Yeah, and I mean, they were a couple goals away from a Stanley Cup, right? Like not just the Stanley Cup final or anything. They were a couple goals away from winning the Stanley Cup. So obviously, I think he would like to stay in Edmonton and kind of continue that story with them. But just because Draisaitl signed doesn't mean that McDavid has to, right? He still has a year to make a decision here. And obviously, I think it makes it easier for him now that Draisaitl is re-signed and not hitting free agency. Because if Draisaitl left, then obviously it makes it easier for McDavid to want to leave if he were, leaning that way. But anything's possible. I never thought John Tavares was going to leave New York. I honestly didn't until that final season. So anything is possible. And we heard that Matthews was instrumental in, getting John Tavares to sign with the Leafs. He called him that offseason and said, hey, we're trying to build something here, right? It would be fantastic. And the other thing when thinking about all this, and again, I'm not saying that McDavid's going to end up in Toronto. I'm just saying things to consider, right? Anything can happen. Mitch Marner doesn't have a contract extension yet. So that's a lot of money off the books if they decide that, they want to let him walk, that they can use next season. Obviously, they're going to have to use some of that for contract extensions for, Jake McCabe. And obviously we talked about Matthew Nyes and guys like that. If they want to re-sign them, which they should, I think those players at least. But the salary cap goes up every year. So something to consider in the coming years, right? That the Leafs do have some salary cap they can, put away for Connor McDavid if they want to in a year's time. But yeah, it's still very interesting. And the fact that they're training together and talking together, obviously, like I said, they're talking business. It's true. There's no way that didn't come up at all, or what he's thinking, at least in terms of his future in Edmonton, and vice versa for Matthews, right? I'm sure McDavid asked him, what are you thinking about your future in Toronto? Because he signed shorter term too. Like Matthews is only here for 4 years, right? Until he needs another contract extension. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot to be discussed.
Yeah, and Matthews locked up longer than McDavid is, but the longer that McDavid remains I guess not, he's signed, but without an extension, as you inch closer to that 2026 threshold, I'm sure next offseason, maybe if they start training again together, these conversations will start to pick up once again, especially just given the fact that there been, you see people like Paul Bissonnette coming out, pump the brakes, we all know what's coming, eating ice cream with the enemy coach. It's like very interesting to me. Everyone is really starting to hop on it. Now, again, most of this is kind of like silly speculation. I'm sure a lot of people, and us included, I don't think that it's likely at all that McDavid comes to Toronto. That being said, if he does decide to leave Edmonton and for whatever reason doesn't want to stay, the Leafs are probably right up there, number one, or at least top three in his destinations, you would assume. I can guarantee you the Leafs would definitely do whatever they could possibly do to bring him home if he wants to come to Toronto. But the Marner thing's definitely interesting. Any final thoughts on this one? A bit of a fun one today. I do think, though, that it's the longer he stays without an extension, the more likely it is. And obviously, we know the ties to him, Canada, Austin Matthews. It's more likely than probably any other team in the NHL if he decides to leave.
Yeah, they still have some time to make a decision on that, the team and obviously the player, right? But like you said, the longer it goes, the more questions that are going to pop up, right? And without that certainty, because the same thing happened with John Tavares. Honestly, personally, I never thought he was going to leave the Islanders until that last season where he kept pushing things. They kept pushing things, and he was telling the team, hey, this is what we got to do in order for me to stay. They didn't do it, and then he ended up leaving. So obviously a different situation here than John Tavares, but anything is possible. I didn't think a player like that was going to leave that team. So it's pretty interesting just to talk about, and I'm sure, the discussion is going to continue for the next year or two until, McDavid's contract comes to an end. But I don't even know, where does he even fit in the lineup? That could be problematic too, because you have two number one centers at that point. Matthews just got the C, right? So could be a little problematic too, but I don't know, something to discuss. And it's a fun little topic if the Leafs were to, get those two, but it would be like an all-star team in terms of centers, at least.
Yeah, that's a problem that I'm sure we would enjoy having. So it would be very
a good problem.
Yeah, let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. And as we're inching closer and closer to the season, hopefully the Leafs can continue to improve their roster so that way McDavid will want to come here in the future. But let us know. We'll see you soon.